The stockroom door slammed shut, sealing Elliot and Micah in a cocoon of muffled chaos and flickering light. Outside, the department store thrummed with holiday shoppers, their voices a dull roar through the thin walls. But in here, time seemed to pause, heavy with possibility. Elliot's heart pounded as Micah's gaze locked onto his, a look that felt like a question, a dare, a prayer. Elliot hadn't planned to be here, wedged between towers of unsorted sweaters and cardboard boxes in the back of Harper's department store in downtown Seattle. He was just a seasonal hire, a 26-year-old graphic designer scraping by on freelance gigs, taking this retail job to afford Christmas gifts for his little sister, Lila. The stockroom was supposed to be a place to hide from the relentless customers, not the setting for a moment that could unravel his carefully guarded world. Micah, on the other hand, was a permanent fixture at Harper's. At 28, he managed the men's clothing section with a quiet confidence that drew people in, customers and coworkers alike. His deep brown eyes held stories he rarely shared, and his sharp jawline softened only when he smiled, which wasn't often. But when he did, like now, standing just inches from Elliot, it was enough to make the air feel electric. They'd been circling each other for weeks. It started with small talk during breaks, Elliot's nervous ramblings about his art, Micah's dry humor cutting through the monotony of folding shirts. Then came the glances, the kind that lingered a second too long, and the accidental touches when they passed each other in the narrow stockroom aisles. Elliot told himself it was nothing. He wasn't out, not really. Growing up in a small town outside Spokane, he'd learned to keep his feelings locked tight, especially after his father's cold dismissal when he'd tried to come out at 17. Not in my house, his dad had said, and that was the end of it. Elliot had moved to Seattle to start over, but the fear lingered, a shadow that followed him into every relationship. Micah, though, was different. He didn't push, didn't pry. He just watched, like he could see through Elliot's defenses to the truth underneath. And now, in this cramped stockroom, with the world shut out, Micah's gaze was doing something dangerous. It was pulling Elliot apart. "Elliot," Micah said softly, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You okay?" Elliot swallowed, his throat dry. "Yeah, just hot in here, right?" He forced a laugh, tugging at the collar of his navy Harper's polo. The lie was flimsy, and Micah's raised eyebrow called it out without a word. They were supposed to be organizing the new shipment of winter coats, but the task had been forgotten the moment their hands brushed while reaching for the same box. Now they stood frozen, the air between them charged with something neither had dared name. Micah took a step closer, his boots scuffing against the concrete floor. Elliot's breath hitched. "I saw you," Micah said, his voice steady but laced with something raw. "Last week, when you were sketching in the break room. That portrait of Lila. You're good, Elliot. Really good." Elliot blinked, caught off guard. He'd been doodling his sister's face during a rare, quiet moment, unaware anyone was watching. "It's just something I do," he mumbled, cheeks warming. "Helps me think." Micah nodded, his eyes never leaving Elliot's. "It's more than that. It's you. The way you see people." He paused, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. "The way you see me." The words hit like a spark in dry grass. Elliot's pulse raced, his mind scrambling for a response, but all he could do was stare. Micah's hand moved, hesitant at first, then deliberate, resting lightly on Elliot's wrist. The touch was warm, grounding, and terrifying all at once. "Micah," Elliot started, but the words died. What could he say? That he'd spent weeks dreaming of this moment, but was too scared to act? That every time Micah smiled at him, it felt like a lifeline and a cliff's edge? Micah's hand tightened slightly, not possessive but pleading. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "But I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this. Aren't you?" The question hung between them, heavy and fragile. Elliot's chest ached with the weight of it. He wanted to run, to hide, to keep the walls he'd built intact. But Micah's eyes, those damn eyes, held him in place, asking for something Elliot wasn't sure he could give. The stockroom felt smaller now, the shelves closing in, the air thick with the scent of new fabric and possibility. Elliot's hand trembled as he reached out, his fingers grazing Micah's. It was a small gesture, but it felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. And then, without a word, Micah sank to his knees. Elliot's breath caught in his throat, his world narrowing to the sight of Micah kneeling before him. The stockroom's dim light cast shadows across Micah's face, highlighting the quiet intensity in his eyes. A look that wasn't just desire but something deeper, something that asked for permission, for trust. Elliot's heart thundered, torn between fear and a longing so fierce it threatened to consume him. "Micah, what are you?" Elliot's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. He took a step back, his sneakers squeaking against the concrete, but Micah's gaze held him rooted. "I'm not asking for everything," Micah said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his posture. "Just a chance to be real with you." His hands rested lightly on his thighs, fingers twitching as if fighting the urge to reach out again. "I've been waiting, Elliot. Waiting for you to see I'm not going anywhere." Elliot's mind reeled. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not now, not with the weight of his past pressing down on him. He thought of his father's voice, sharp and unyielding, echoing through years of silence. He thought of the nights he'd spent alone in his tiny Seattle apartment, sketching faces he'd never dare love. And yet, here was Micah, offering something Elliot had never let himself believe in, a future where he didn't have to hide. "I don't know how to do this," Elliot admitted, his voice raw. I've never let myself," he trailed off, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The confession felt like peeling back skin, exposing something tender and unhealed. Micah's expression softened, but he didn't stand. He stayed there, on his knees, giving Elliot the space to decide. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "I don't either. But I know I want this, us. Whatever that looks like." The word us hit Elliot like a wave, pulling him under. He wanted to believe in it, to let himself fall into the possibility of Micah's warmth, his steadiness. But fear was a powerful thing, and it whispered that this moment, this fragile, beautiful moment, could shatter everything. The stockroom door rattled suddenly, making them both jump. "Elliot? Micah? You guys in there?" It was Tara, their shift supervisor, her voice muffled but impatient. "We're swamped out here. Need those coats on the floor, like yesterday." Micah stood smoothly, brushing off his jeans, but his eyes never left Elliot's. "We'll be out in a sec," he called back, his tone calm, betraying none of the storm brewing between them. He stepped closer to Elliot, lowering his voice. "This isn't over. I'll wait, okay? As long as you need." Elliot nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. Micah gave him a small, reassuring smile before turning to grab a stack of coats from the nearest shelf. The moment broke, but its weight lingered, heavy in the air as they worked side by side in silence, sorting through the shipment. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Elliot moved through the motions, ringing up customers, folding sweaters, dodging the chaos of last-minute shoppers. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying Micah's words, his eyes, the way he'd knelt as if offering his heart. By the time the store closed, Elliot's nerves were frayed, his thoughts a tangled mess of want and fear. As they locked up, Micah lingered by the employee exit, his breath visible in the cold December air. "You want to ride home?" he asked, casual but hopeful. His beat-up Honda was parked across the street, a faint glow from the streetlights reflecting off its hood. Elliot hesitated. His apartment was only a 15-minute walk, and he'd done it countless times in worse weather. But the idea of being alone with Micah again, even for a short drive, felt like stepping back into that stockroom. Dangerous, exhilarating, inevitable. "Sure," he said finally, shoving his hands into his coat pockets to hide their trembling. Micah's smile widened, and they crossed the street together, their footsteps crunching in the light snow. The car was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and leather. Micah drove in silence at first, the radio playing soft indie rock in the background. Elliot stared out the window, watching Seattle's lights blur past, his mind racing. He wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between them, but the words wouldn't come. "You ever think about leaving?" Micah asked suddenly, his eyes on the road. "Not just Seattle, but all of it. The expectations, the rules. Just going somewhere you can be who you are." Elliot turned to look at him, surprised. Sometimes, he admitted. But it's not that easy. My sister's still in Spokane, and I don't know. I've spent so long trying to fit in, I'm not sure I'd know how to stop. Micah nodded, his expression thoughtful. I get that. I grew up in a place like that too. Small town in Idaho. Church every Sunday, the whole deal. Coming out wasn't exactly a party. But I figured out who I wanted to be, not who they told me to be. Elliot's chest tightened. How'd you do it? Just decide to be brave? Micah laughed softly, a sound that warmed the car more than the heater. I'm not brave, Elliot. I'm just stubborn. And I had people who made it worth it. He glanced at Elliot, his eyes softening. Still do. The car pulled up to Elliot's apartment building, a modest brick complex with flickering hallway lights. Elliot's hand hovered over the door handle, reluctant to leave. Thanks for the ride, he said, his voice barely audible. Anytime, Micah replied, and there it was again. That look, the one that asked for permission, for trust, for more. Elliot got out, the cold air hitting him like a slap, but as he walked to his door, he felt Micah's gaze on his back, steady and unwavering. He didn't look back, but he knew he'd see Micah again tomorrow, and that thought alone was enough to keep him awake all night. The next day at Harper's, the stockroom felt different, like it held secrets only Elliot and Micah shared. The shelves were still cluttered, the fluorescent lights still buzzed, but every glance between them carried the weight of yesterday's moment. Elliot tried to focus on unpacking boxes, but his hands shook, his mind replaying Micah's knees hitting the floor, his quiet plea for a chance. Micah, for his part, acted like nothing had changed. He joked with Tara, helped a customer find the perfect tie, and moved through the store with his usual ease. But Elliot caught the subtle looks, Micah's eyes lingering on him when he thought no one noticed, the way his fingers brushed Elliot's when handing over a stack of shirts. Each touch was a spark, reigniting the fire Elliot was trying so hard to smother. By mid-afternoon, the store was a madhouse, holiday shoppers swarming like bees. Elliot was sent to the stockroom to grab more gift boxes, and Micah volunteered to help. The door clicked shut behind them, and the noise of the store faded, leaving them alone again in that charged, confined space. You've been quiet today, Micah said, leaning against a shelf, his tone light, but his eyes searching. Everything okay? Elliot busied himself with a box, avoiding Micah's gaze. Just tired. Long night. It wasn't a lie. He'd barely slept, torn between wanting to run to Micah and wanting to run away entirely. Micah stepped closer, his presence warm and steady. You don't have to do this alone, you know. Whatever's going on in your head. Elliot's hands stilled, his chest tight. It's not that simple, he said, his voice low. You don't know what it's like growing up where I did. My dad, he made it clear what he thought of people like me. And I've been carrying that for so long. Micah's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed soft. I don't know your story, Elliot, but I know what it's like to feel like you're not enough. My family wasn't exactly thrilled when I came out either. My mom still prays for me every night, like I'm some kind of sin she can fix. He paused, his eyes softening. But you find people who see you for you. And that's worth everything. Elliot's throat burned. He wanted to believe it, wanted to let go of the fear that had defined him for so long. But it wasn't just his father's voice in his head now. It was the thought of Lila, his 16-year-old sister, still living in that small town, still under their father's roof. If Elliot came out, if he let himself love Micah, what would it mean for her? Would she be caught in the crossfire of their father's anger? I want to, Elliot whispered, his voice breaking. I want to be whatever this is. But I'm scared, Micah. I'm scared of what it'll cost. Micah reached out, his hand resting gently on Elliot's shoulder. I know, and I'm not going to push you. But I'm here, okay? I'm not going anywhere. The moment stretched, fragile and heavy, until the stockroom door swung open. Tara poked her head in, her expression frazzled. Guys, seriously, we need those gift boxes now. Let's go. They sprang apart, grabbing boxes and hurrying out, but the air between them hummed with unfinished business. The rest of the shift was a blur of customers and chaos, but Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads, with Micah on one side and his past on the other. That night, Elliot sat in his apartment, sketching absently. The pencil moved across the page, tracing the lines of Micah's face, his sharp jaw, his intense eyes, the way his lips curved when he smiled. The drawing was raw, unguarded, a reflection of everything Elliot felt but couldn't say. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the sketchbook, his heart heavy. The next morning, he got a text from Lila. "Dad's being weird again. Keeps asking where you're at for Christmas. You coming home?" The words twisted in his gut. Going home meant facing his father, pretending to be someone he wasn't. But staying away meant leaving Lila to deal with him alone. Elliot typed a quick reply, "Not sure yet. You okay?" and headed to work, his mind a storm of doubt and longing. When he saw Micah in the break room, pouring coffee, his heart lifted despite himself. "Morning," Micah said, offering a small smile. "Sleep any better?" Elliot shook his head, managing a weak grin. "Not really. You?" Micah shrugged, his eyes warm. "I'll survive. Got plans for the weekend." The question was casual, but Elliot felt the weight behind it. A chance to see Micah outside the store, away from the stockroom's charged intimacy. "Not yet," he said, hesitating. "You?" "There's this art fair downtown," Micah said, leaning against the counter. "Thought it might be your thing. Want to come with?" Elliot's pulse quickened. It wasn't a date, not exactly, but it felt like a step toward something bigger. "Maybe," he said, his voice cautious but curious. "I'll let you know." Micah nodded, unfazed by the non-committal answer. "Cool. No pressure." But as Elliot walked away, he felt the pressure, not from Micah, but from himself. The pressure to choose, to be brave, to let himself want what he'd spent years denying. The art fair was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, tucked into a sprawling park in Seattle's Capitol Hill. Booths lined the paths, showcasing paintings, sculptures, and handmade jewelry, while buskers strummed guitars, and the air smelled of coffee and fresh pastries. Elliot walked beside Micah, their shoulders brushing occasionally as they navigated the crowd, each touch sending a jolt through him. He'd almost backed out that morning, his phone buzzing with another text from Lila. "Dad's pissed you haven't called. Says you're abandoning us." The words had stung, reopening old wounds, but Micah's casual invitation had been a lifeline. Now, standing here, surrounded by art and life, Elliot felt a flicker of freedom he hadn't known in years. Micah stopped at a booth displaying vibrant watercolor portraits, his eyes lighting up. "These are amazing," he said, pointing to a painting of a young woman with fierce, expressive eyes. "Reminds me of your sketches. You ever show your work anywhere?" Elliot shook his head, his cheeks warming. "Nah, it's just for me. Helps me process stuff." Micah turned to him, his gaze steady. "You should. The world deserves to see what you see." The compliment landed softly, but it carried weight. Elliot looked away, pretending to study a sculpture, but his mind was racing. Micah saw him, not just the nervous retail worker or the guy hiding from his past, but the artist, the dreamer, the person he'd buried under layers of fear. They wandered for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Micah's love for old jazz records, Elliot's obsession with sci-fi novels, the way Seattle's rain felt like a second skin. With each step, Elliot felt the walls he'd built start to crack, letting in light he hadn't realized he'd been missing. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they found a quiet spot by a fountain. Micah sat on the edge, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, his breath visible in the chilly air. "You having fun?" he asked, his tone light, but his eyes searching. "Yeah," Elliot said, surprised by how much he meant it. "It's nice, being here, with you." They sat in comfortable silence, the fountain's soft gurgle filling the space. Elliot's heart raced, not with fear this time, but with possibility. He wanted to reach for Micah's hand, to close the distance between them, but the weight of his father's voice, Lila's texts, the years of hiding, it all held him back. "I'm trying," Elliot said suddenly, his voice barely audible, "to be okay with this. With us. But it's hard." Micah nodded, his expression gentle. "I know. And I'm not asking you to have it all figured out. Just don't shut me out, okay?" Elliot swallowed, his throat tight. "I'll try." That night, back in his apartment, Elliot pulled out his sketchbook. He drew Micah at the fountain, capturing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet strength in his posture. The drawing felt like a confession, a step towards something real. But the next day at work, reality crashed back in. Tara pulled Elliot aside during a lull, her expression serious. "You okay, Elliot? You've been distracted lately. If something's going on, you can tell me." Elliot forced a smile, his stomach twisting. "Just family stuff? I'm fine." Tara didn't look convinced, but she let it go. As Elliot returned to the sales floor, he caught sight of Micah helping a customer, his laugh echoing across the store. The sight grounded him, but it also reminded him of the stakes. If he let himself fall for Micah, there was no going back. That evening, as they restocked shelves after closing, Micah brought up the art fair again. "You should submit something next year," he said, folding a sweater with precision. "Your stuff's better than half the art there." Elliot laughed, shaking his head. "You're biased." "Maybe," Micah said, grinning. "But I'm also right." Their banter was cut short by a loud crash from the stockroom. They rushed in to find a shelf had collapsed, spilling boxes across the floor. "Great," Micah muttered, surveying the mess. "This'll take all night." They worked together to clean it up, their movements synchronized despite the chaos. As they restacked boxes, their hands brushed again, and Elliot felt the familiar spark. This time, he didn't pull away. Instead, he let his fingers linger, his eyes meeting Micah's. "Elliot," Micah said softly, his voice a question and a promise. Elliot's heart pounded, but he didn't look away. "I'm scared," he admitted. "But I want this. I want you." Micah's breath hitched, his eyes bright with something unguarded. He stepped closer, the spilled boxes forgotten, and for a moment, it was just them, the stockroom a world of their own. The stockroom was a mess, but to Elliot, it felt like sacred ground. Micah stood close, his breath warm in the cool air, his eyes searching Elliot's for permission to cross the line they'd been dancing around for weeks. Elliot's admission, "I want you," hung between them, fragile and electric, a spark waiting to ignite. Before either could speak, the stockroom door swung open. "You guys okay in here?" Tara called, her voice sharp with concern. Heard a crash. Elliot stepped back, his face burning, as Micah turned to Tara with a casual grin. "Just a shelf giving up on us," he said, gesturing to the scattered boxes. "We've got it under control." Tara raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "All right, but hurry up. I want to lock up sometime this century." She disappeared, leaving them alone again, but the moment had shifted, the intimacy tempered by the interruption. They worked in silence, restacking boxes, but the air crackled with unspoken words. When the last box was in place, Micah turned to Elliot, his expression serious. "You meant that, right? What you said?" Elliot nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, I meant it. I'm just figuring out how to do this." Micah's smile was soft, reassuring. "That's enough for now." The next few days were a whirlwind of holiday chaos at Harper's, but Elliot felt lighter, like he'd shed a layer of armor. He and Micah stole moments when they could, a shared glance across the sales floor, a quick coffee run during a break, a brush of hands in the stockroom. Each interaction was a step towards something real, something Elliot was starting to believe in. But home was another story. Lila's texts grew more frequent, her tone increasingly desperate. "Dad's getting worse. He's talking about cutting you off if you don't come home for Christmas." Elliot's stomach churned. He wanted to be there for Lila, but the thought of facing his father, of pretending to be someone he wasn't, made him feel like he was drowning. On Christmas Eve, the store was quieter, most shoppers already home with their gifts. Elliot and Micah were assigned to close, a task that left them alone in the stockroom once again. As they sorted the last of the returns, Micah broke the silence. "You going home tomorrow?" he asked, his tone careful. Elliot sighed, leaning against a shelf. "I don't know. My sister needs me, but my dad he's not exactly welcoming. Especially if he knew about." He gestured vaguely between them, unable to say the words. Micah's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "You don't have to tell him anything you're not ready for. But you deserve to be yourself, Elliot. With or without him." Elliot's eyes stung, and he looked away, focusing on a stack of sweaters. "What if I lose them? Lila's the only family I've got who matters." Micah stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on Elliot's arm. You won't lose her. She sounds like she loves you. And you've got people here, too. You've got me." The words were a lifeline, and Elliot clung to them. He turned to Micah, their faces inches apart, and for the first time, he let himself lean in. The kiss was tentative at first, a brush of lips that carried years of fear and hope. Then it deepened, Micah's hands finding Elliot's waist, pulling him closer. The stockroom faded away, leaving only the warmth of Micah's touch, the steady beat of his heart. When they pulled apart, Elliot's breath was shaky, but he was smiling. That was wow. Micah laughed, a sound that lit up the dim room. Yeah, wow. They finished closing the store, their movements lighter, their smiles secret. But as Elliot walked home through the snow, his phone buzzed with another text from Lila. "Please come home. I need you." The guilt hit hard, threatening to unravel the joy of the night. He called Lila, his heart pounding as the phone rang. "Elliot." Her voice was small, scared. "You okay?" "I'm okay," he said, his throat tight. "Are you?" She hesitated. "Dad's been drinking again. He keeps saying you're not family if you don't show up. I don't know what to do." Elliot's chest ached. "I'll be there, Lila. Tomorrow. I promise." He hung up, the weight of the promise settling over him. He wanted to be brave, for Lila, for Micah, for himself. But as he packed a bag for Spokane, he couldn't shake the fear that going home might cost him everything he was starting to build. The bus to Spokane rattled along the icy highway, each mile pulling Elliot closer to a past he'd tried to leave behind. He stared out the window, the winter landscape blurring into a haze of white and gray, his mind replaying the kiss in the stockroom. Micah's warmth, his steady presence, felt like a dream now, something too fragile to survive the cold reality of his father's house. When he arrived, Lila was waiting at the bus station, her face lighting up despite the worry in her eyes. She hugged him tightly, her small frame trembling in the cold. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. The house was the same as always, cramped, cluttered, the air thick with the scent of stale beer and cigarette smoke. Their father, Tom, sat in his recliner, his face hard as he watched Elliot walk in. "So you finally showed up," he said, his voice rough. "Thought you were too good for us now." Elliot forced a neutral expression, his stomach twisting. "Just been busy, Dad. Work and stuff." Tom grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Work? Right. You still drawing those pictures? Waste of time." Lila shot Elliot a sympathetic look, but he shook his head slightly, signaling her to stay quiet. Dinner was tense, the silence broken only by the clink of forks and Tom's occasional grumbling about the economy, the neighbors, anything that set him off. Elliot kept his head down, his thoughts drifting to Micah, to the stockroom, to the person he was starting to become. That night, as he and Lila sat on her bed, she finally spoke up. "You're different," she said, her voice soft. "Happier, maybe. What's going on?" Elliot hesitated, his heart pounding. He'd never told Lila the truth, not fully. But her wide, trusting eyes made him want to try. "There's someone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Micah. He's important to me." Lila's face lit up, a grin breaking through her worry. "You're in love, aren't you?" Elliot's cheeks burned, but he couldn't help smiling. "Maybe. It's new. Scary." She squeezed his hand. "I'm happy for you, El. You deserve that." But the moment was shattered by a shout from the living room. "Elliot, get out here." Tom stood by the recliner, holding Elliot's sketchbook, the one he'd brought to show Lila his latest drawings. The page was open to Micah's portrait, the one from the fountain, raw and full of longing. Tom's face was red, his eyes blazing. "What the hell is this?" Elliot's heart stopped. "It's just a drawing, Dad. Don't lie to me," Tom roared, throwing the sketchbook to the floor. "You think I don't know what this means? You're one of them, aren't you?" Lila stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Dad, stop it. It's just a picture. Stay out of this, Lila." Tom snapped, his glare fixed on Elliot. "I told you, not in my house. You want to live like that. You're no son of mine." The words cut deeper than Elliot expected, tearing open wounds he thought had healed. He wanted to fight back, to tell his father he was wrong, but fear choked him. Instead, he grabbed his sketchbook and his bag, his hands shaking. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice low but steady. "Lila, I'll call you." She followed him to the door, tears in her eyes. "El, don't go. Please." "I have to," he said, hugging her tightly. I'll be okay. You will too. The bus ride back to Seattle was a blur, the weight of his father's words pressing down on him. When he got home, he texted Micah, "Can we talk?" Micah was at his apartment within an hour, his face full of concern. "What happened?" he asked, stepping inside. Elliot told him everything. The fight, his father's anger, the sketchbook. Micah listened, his hand resting on Elliot's knee, a quiet anchor in the storm. When Elliot finished, his voice hoarse, Micah pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "You're enough," Micah whispered. "Exactly as you are." Elliot clung to him, the tears he'd held back finally falling. For the first time, he believed it might be true. The days after Christmas were a quiet reckoning. Elliot returned to Harper's, his heart raw but lighter, like a weight had finally shifted. Micah was there, steady as ever, and their moments together, stockroom glances, shared lunches, late-night texts, became a lifeline. Elliot started sketching again, not just Micah but himself, capturing the person he was becoming, someone unafraid to love. Lila called a week later, her voice brighter. "I told Dad he was wrong," she said. "He's still mad, but I think he'll come around. I'm proud of you, El." Elliot smiled, his eyes stinging. "Thanks, Lila. I'm proud of you too." That night, he and Micah walked through Capitol Hill, the streets alive with New Year's Eve energy. They stopped at the same fountain from the art fair, the water sparkling under the city lights. Micah took Elliot's hand, his grip warm and sure. "I'm all in," Elliot said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "For this. For us." Micah's eyes softened, and he leaned in, their kiss soft but certain, a promise sealed in the glow of a new year. The stockroom had been where it started, a moment of vulnerability that changed everything. But this was where they began. As they stood together, the world noisy and bright around them, Elliot felt something new, hope. Not just for him and Micah, but for a life where he could be whole, loved, and free. And that was worth everything.